Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. In light of the new Omicron variant, the Trudeau Liberals have brought forth more travel restrictions, including banning nationals from 3 more countries. Strong winds reaching up to 100 kilometers an hour knocked out power to a number of communities here in southwestern Alberta. And the fundraising numbers are in from various Movember initiatives. We look at a creative campaign that took place in Claresholm.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. With news of the new COVID-19 variant known as Omicron, all travelers entering Canada, except those coming from the United States, will now need to be tested for COVID-19 upon arrival at the airport. They will then have to be isolated until results come in, even if they're fully vaccinated. Canada's health minister says Ottawa is also banning foreign nationals who have recently been in 3 more countries, Nigeria, Egypt, and Malawi. That is in addition to the 7 nations in southern Africa announced last week.
Let us also remind Canadians that those rules have always changed over the last 20 months and change and will continue to change as the situation evolves. So this is what we are doing today. It may well be that as we gain time, we find that the new variant is of less concern than what some experts might be fearing, but the situation might also evolve differently. So we're reminding Canadians that travel rules and border rules in particular can always change, and that involves both testing and quarantine measures, and we will be watching the situation, as all Canadians will do, over the next days and weeks.
The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms announced its intention to challenge Transport Canada's Ministerial Order 47 in federal court. The order announced by Ottawa prevents Canadians who have not received the COVID-19 vaccine from boarding planes, trains, and marine passenger vessels anywhere in Canada. President of the Justice Centre, John Carpe, says this is in direct violation of our rights and freedoms.
The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees Canadians the right to freely enter and freely leave Canada and travel freely across Canada. And now this fundamental constitutional right is being denied to Canadians that are exercising another constitutional right, the right to bodily autonomy, which is the right to decide for yourself whether to get injected with something or whether to get a medical treatment. And the government just has no scientific basis to justify excluding unvaccinated Canadians from air and train travel.
Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, confirmed that the Omicron variant case in our province is from someone who returned not only from Nigeria, but also from the Netherlands. The traveler is now in isolation. Dr. Hinshaw says health officials in Alberta were expecting the arrival of this new variant.
We are well prepared for this eventuality and have the necessary tools in place to monitor this case and any potential spread of the variant. As I have mentioned, our goal is to delay the spread of Omicron while we learn more about it. At this time, this is the only confirmed case of Omicron in the province. With the emergence of this new variant, I want to remind Albertans of the steps they can take to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. These steps have worked before, and we anticipate they will continue to work with this new variant. First and foremost, having a complete vaccine series is the best defense we have against COVID-19. If you haven't already, please take the necessary steps to be immunized. Maintain good hand hygiene, wear a mask in all indoor public places, keep your gatherings small and outdoors if possible, avoid crowded indoor places, and maintain 2 meters of physical distancing at all times when interacting with people outside your household.
It appears as though the Kenney government is backing away from mandating vaccines for nurses and other healthcare professionals. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson explains what this means for Alberta's healthcare workers moving forward.
Basically, they looked at some of the sites in the province and said, there's simply not enough people working at some of these sites that we can, fully enforce this policy. So I believe it's about 250 healthcare workers are affected by this at 16 sites or something like that around the province. Now, what that's going to mean for them is they can do testing. They'll have to pay for it within 48 hours of their shift, I believe, and then they can work. The issue sort of being that, if these people had been put on unpaid leave, there simply wouldn't have been enough people to deliver healthcare in those parts of the province.
Tyler Dawson will also discuss how the Alberta economy is turning around and the driving forces behind it. That Q&A is coming up after business news. A number of Albertans have been fighting the province's mandates and restrictions since the start of the pandemic. One such Alberta man took his fight to social media. Now he has well over 60,000 followers on his social media page. Joshua Switzer Crow, otherwise known as the Angry Albertan, continues to lead others in public protests and believes that there is still a path forward to maintain our personal freedoms.
Now is not the time to give in my opinion. Every person we lose at this point just makes this fight harder. I mean, all we want is bodily autonomy. We want the decision to decide, or we want to make the decision of what goes in or on our body, whether it be a mask or a vaccine, anything like that. And we need to stay credible. We can't let the crazies get in front of this and demand civil war and all this crazy stuff. There is a peaceful way out of this. Our government has checks and balances. It's a scale. They've tipped that scale one way. It is our job to tip it the other way.
The Angry Albertan is calling on the Alberta government to provide full disclosure on the side effects of the mRNA vaccines so that parents can be fully informed when consenting to have their young children being vaccinated. Health officials in British Columbia say they too now have a confirmed case of the Omicron variant. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry says similar to Alberta, it was a person who returned from Nigeria who is now in isolation.
To date, the Public Health Agency of Canada, who we've been working closely with since late last week when this was first identified, has identified 204 people in BC who were recently in affected areas. And the quarantine service, working with our teams, have connected with all of these individuals over the past few days, and they have been sent for PCR testing and are in isolation. This new variant of concern reminds us that we are in a global storm and that it is not equal everywhere around the world. And equal access to vaccination is something that's going to be important for us to get through this.
BC's Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth is warning against non-essential travel as another atmospheric river pours over BC. Officials say the Central Coast may see some of the biggest impacts yet.
In southwest BC, Environment Canada is warning of extreme rainfall that may worsen existing flooding or create new flooding. This storm may not have the same level of intensity as we saw mid-month in some of our hardest hit areas, such as the Fraser Valley, but the cumulative effect of this succession of storms will be and continues to be a major challenge. As communities in coastal and southwest BC brace for a heavy storm this evening, the best approach is to avoid non-essential travel and wait out the weather.
Risks associated through the Central Coast, where there is a risk of moderate to severe flooding from the current forecasted conditions. And that would include, the potential for flooding within communities in the Central Coast, in the Bella Coola Valley, Weekanoo, and the Kincome River. We expect that really to be over the next 48 hours, so rising river levels through today and continued tomorrow with that ongoing rainfall.
A wildfire is burning in the foothills of southwestern Alberta. An emergency alert says the first, which is on the west side of Highway 22, is considered out of control, but residents in the area are not at immediate risk. That could change, however, if the winds south of Chain Lakes Provincial Park shift. Fire officials say the strong winds, up to 110 kilometers an hour, are complicating efforts to control the blaze. Environment Canada says the strong westerly winds could reach speeds of up to 140 kilometers an hour throughout the day. Lethbridge County announced that due to the dry, windy conditions, a new fire ban is now in effect. That applies to all open fires within municipal boundaries. Under the fire ban, all active fire permits are canceled. Burning of any kind is not permitted, including burning anything in a barrel, household garbage, and yard debris. The county also said that several power outages have been reported, including south and northwest of Lethbridge. Crews are out working to restore power as quickly as possible. You know, another municipality that's no stranger to the wind is Cardston, Alberta. Strong winds knocked down dozens of trees and took down power lines as well. The town experienced a power outage from around 2 a.m. till the early morning hours, resulting in a number of businesses and schools in both Cardston and McGrath being closed today.
Oh yeah, we got hit like most of southern Alberta with that wild wind last night. Our guys started responding at about 2 a.m. And just dealing with dangerous lines that were down, trees that had come down were active in lines. If I were to guess, I'd say probably 100 or so mature trees that have come down. Like we've had our public works crew has just been opening up streets this morning, is what they've been doing all morning, is cutting trees out and getting streets open. So our cemetery, which again has been around since the beginning of time, I think we have 30 down just in the cemetery. We still have a few houses that are still without power, but we anticipate having them going by the end of day. It is coming together, but it was a pretty wild night, it looks like, when you drive around the community.
The strong westerly winds we've been experiencing also caused a power outage in Colehurst, plus some homes and businesses were also damaged in our region. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a quick look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, will those damaging winds be dying down anytime soon?
Well, there was a wind warning earlier in effect today for the southern Alberta region, informing us that winds should weaken below that warning criteria. Those winds should remain gusty up to 70 kilometers per hour this evening. Much better than those 100K winds that we were experiencing, but not much better. Those 70K winds will continue into tomorrow. I will have more details coming up, though, later on in the newscast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. In the month of November, funds were raised to support those battling prostate and testicular cancer, plus raise awareness of suicide prevention in men. This annual fundraiser is called Movember. All kinds of mustaches were grown throughout the campaign. As Micah Quinn explains now, groups from the town of Claresholm joined forces to grow their own stylish stashes while raising money for a great cause.
I know you want to leave me. I refuse to let you go.
Members of the Mustaches of Motown from the town of Claresholm, the Mounted Mustaches from the Claresholm and Nanton RCMP, the I'm Too Sparky for My Stash from the Claresholm Fire Department, and the I Mustache You a Question from the Willow Creek Composite High School grew their best mustaches to see who could raise the most amount of money for the Movember fundraiser. Kyle Ikema and Holly Gillespie started the fundraiser as a way to rally the community together for a good cause, regardless of the current COVID restrictions.
I was looking for something to kind of raise awareness for that, and especially with a lot of the first responders in town, that getting them on board and really being a voice for that and advocating for that. So that was a big reason why I wanted to kind of spearhead this fundraiser.
After final tallies on Wednesday morning, the I'm Too Sparky for My Stash team from the Claresholm Fire Department came out on top with the win.
The total amount raised now is $3,295, which is like phenomenal. Our first goal was 1,000, and then it changed to 2,000, and we never thought we would be able to raise this much.
Gillespie and Ikema are hoping to do the Movember fundraiser every year moving forward, especially considering the huge outpouring of support they received this time around.
And the last 3 days have just been donations being pumped in from people wanting to just get these guys in a friendly competition, I guess. So I am incredibly, incredibly grateful. And I was actually shocked with the numbers this morning when we got to work. So I'm kind of speechless about it, actually.
Close to $25 million was raised in Canada for the Movember campaign in 2020. The money for the fundraiser goes to supporting and raising awareness for men's health projects focused on mental health and suicide prevention, as well as prostate and testicular cancer. These projects are funded directly by Movember or through other health partners. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The 13th annual Meals on Wheels 23 Days of Christmas fundraiser is in full swing. Meals on Wheels has been going strong in our city since 1970. The program provides over 100 hot meals for those in Lethbridge who can't provide meals for themselves. Volunteers are counted on to prepare the meals as well. On average, over 2,000 meals are delivered over 23 days of the fundraiser. The goal of the campaign is to sponsor all of the meals this year to provide funds to keep the organization running annually. The goal is $30,000, and so far, $25,000 has been raised.
You never take for granted whether or not that it's going to carry on momentum and how things are going, especially this last year of much more challenging time, especially with small businesses that are participating and many restaurants that are participating in organizations. So to see the step up in this 13th year of so quickly of how many people have just said, yes, we're in again, and we want to support this valuable organization is just really humbling to just see that spirit of Lethbridge come through as it always does, and how quickly people have responded.
Since its inception, Meals on Wheels has raised over $250,000. South of the border, a 15-year-old sophomore opened fire at his high school in Michigan on Tuesday, killing 3 people and wounding 8 others, including a teacher. Police are still trying to determine the motive behind the attack at Oxford High School. The shooter is now in custody. Mourners packed a church in Michigan to grieve those who were killed and injured.
I don't understand how anyone, could do to a community what has been done.
We're all in this together. We're not alone. And we're going to get through it together. And we're not going to get through it unchanged. And this is going to be a day. It's going to be a day we're going to remember. And you students, this community stands with you. They're here for you. Families, they're here for you.
Oakland County, Michigan Sheriff Michael Bouchard says the gun used in the school shooting was purchased by the suspect's father on November 26th, just 4 days before the attack.
The deputies removed from the suspect a 9mm Sig Sauer SP 2022 pistol. It was loaded at the time and still contained 7 rounds of ammunition. As of right now, we have tragically lost 3 students, a 16-year-old male. You'll have the names of the deceased. The families have been notified. He died in the patrol car on the way to the hospital. A 14-year-old female and a 17-year-old female. Another 8 people were injured, 7 students and 1 teacher. As I mentioned, we have the suspect in custody. He's a 15-year-old male sophomore, a resident of Oxford Village. He was not injured, and he's currently lodged at Children's Village on campus here on homicide and attempt homicide with the approval of the on-duty probate court referee.
Samaritan's Purse is a Christian relief organization that goes all over the world. And the Samaritan's Purse Disaster Assistance Response Team is providing health care to Afghan refugees in Albania. One of their doctors helped to mentor a young Afghan physician, demonstrating God's love along the way.
Here in Albania, we have well over 1,500 Afghan evacuees, ones that fled from the Taliban. They're really in a period of mental anguish, mostly because they left their families behind and they left their homeland, never to return. At the essence, everything that we're doing is built on establishing relationships with the Afghan people, making a connection, whether it's through distributions, the psychosocial support, or the medical clinic. As far as the medical clinic is concerned, we did have one Afghan doctor that was helping us as a translator. His name was Abdul, and we paired him up with Dr. Paul Friel, our Samaritan's Purse doctor, and they had a tremendous relationship. Paul acted as a mentor to Abdul, and Abdul just soaked up that mentorship. It's something that helped give Abdul a hope for the future.
Dr. Paul is man, a big heart. He treats people like his own family. He's like teacher to me, and he treats me like I'm his own son. I love him a lot.
I hope that he understands that it's Christ in me that's coming out. And I've told him that. I said, do you know why we're here? And he said, yeah, you're here to help my people. And I said, well, we're here because of Christ and because he is who he said he was. And he really thought hard about that. That's my hope for him, that this really makes him wonder, well, maybe this Jesus guy is who he said he was.
Great to see the work that Samaritan's Purse continues to do. Well, we had another wind warning from Environment Canada today. In fact, the wind knocked out power in a number of communities across much of southwestern Alberta. How long will the gusty winds be sticking around? Full weather details are coming up. The very strong westerly winds knocked out power to a number of communities here in southwestern Alberta. We saw wind gusts up to 100 kilometers an hour. Jeanette Rocher is back with a full look at our weather forecast. Jeanette, the winds may have died down somewhat. Are we going from maybe wind to rain soon? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's right. But we won't see that until the weekend. And so much for our record breaker today. We didn't get anywhere near to that 15 degrees. In fact, it actually cooled off from last night. The same thing is actually supposed to happen tomorrow. We are looking at a high of 10 degrees, but by the afternoon, that is supposed to cool down to 0 degrees. So we're looking at a cooling trend there as we get into the minuses later on this week. Also, as I was mentioning earlier, those 70K winds still gusting into this evening and into tomorrow, Thursday. Friday, we're looking at that high of only -2 and then up to 3 degrees on Saturday. That's where we're going to see that 30% chance of rain or flurries. Into Sunday, high of -4 only, and then high of 0 on Monday. Looking at snow next Monday, -1 is our high for Tuesday. So it does look like we're starting to get down into the minuses, bringing us more around seasonal. Average high for today was 1 degrees. Average low is -10 degrees. 14 was where we were at back in 1969. That was our hottest on record. Our coldest was -31 back in 1985. Sun rose this morning at 8:07 a.m. Sunset this afternoon 4:34 p.m. Just under 8.5 hours of sunlight, about 8 hours and 27 minutes. 2 minutes rather, less than yesterday. Looking at high winds tomorrow in Victoria, especially in the Juan de Fuca Strait, that should die off by noon. 8 degrees is the high there tomorrow. 7 degrees the high in Vancouver with a mix of sun and cloud. Risk of freezing rain and snow tomorrow in Edmonton. 2 degrees the high. 7 degrees the high in Calgary. They are looking at some flurries there tomorrow as well. Now Saskatoon looking at rain changing to the possibility of flurries there. 3 degrees the high in Regina. Also looking at some flurries as well. -3 is where Winnipeg is sitting tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. As we look to the central part of the country, we're seeing rain showers in Toronto tomorrow. 9 degrees the high, 6 degrees the high in Ottawa. Looking at the chance of showers as well. Rain changing to snow there as well in Montreal. 6 degrees the high as we look to Atlantic Canada. Let's move on over there. Fredericton looking at 4 degrees, rain mixed with snow. Showers expected in Halifax tomorrow, high of 8 degrees. 5 degrees in Charlottetown tomorrow with mainly cloudy skies. And St. John's, Newfoundland, which is right over there, 6 degrees the high and chance of showers. So there you go. That is your forecast.
First, there were floods, and now a potential strike could impact the supply chain coming out of British Columbia. Some container truck drivers serving the Port of Vancouver could walk off the job later this week. Unifor had given notice to 2 companies that around 200 drivers will walk Friday if they're not offered better health care, dental, and higher payments for time spent waiting for their trucks to be loaded and unloaded. A deal was reached late Tuesday with Ahir Transportation, but not yet with Prudential Transportation. Unifor says a strike could threaten Canada's overall port stability as BC's supply chain is already under pressure from rain and floods. A new survey of Canadian manufacturers found that 82% of respondents are facing labor shortages and 75% feel their hiring troubles are even worse than last year. The survey of 445 companies was conducted by the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters in October. It found a lack of workers and material shortages have caused the sector's recovery to slow considerably. Experts say the industry was already struggling to find and retain skilled laborers and now is facing more challenges as the pandemic stymies immigration and causes people to rethink their careers. BRP beat financial expectations even though its third quarter profit dropped more than 35% from a year earlier to $127.7 million. The maker of Ski-Doos and Sea-Doos says the decline occurred as product deliveries were impacted by supply chain disruptions. Revenue dropped from $1.7 to $1.6 billion compared to the same quarter last year. But BRP's normalized earnings were ahead of the $1.33 per share that analysts were expecting. They came in at $1.48 per share. Lululemon is suing exercise equipment company Peloton Interactive over allegations of patent infringement. The Vancouver-based retailer claims that Peloton is selling knockoff Lululemon bras and leggings, infringing on multiple design patents. The lawsuit comes after Peloton ended a co-branding agreement with Lululemon earlier this year and launched its own private label clothing brand in September. Lululemon alleges that Peloton is selling copycat products that imitate several of the retailer's best-selling designs. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 195 points on the day to 20,465. The Dow was down 461 to 34,022. The S&P 500 was down 53 points to 4513, and the Nasdaq was down 283 points on the day to 15,254. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 51 cents to 65.67 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 30 cents to 4.27 US. Gold was up 17 cents to 17.8191 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to 22.33 US an ounce. Wheat is at $12.19 per bushel, barley's at $9.73, canola's at $22.58, and corn is at $10.66 per bushel. Live cattle were up 13 cents to $1.36, feeder cattle were up 98 cents to $165.83, and lean hogs were up 25 cents to $73.63. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.01 US. Recapping one of our top stories, infections from the COVID-19 Omicron variant are now in 20 countries around the world, including here in Canada and the United States. The Trudeau government says travelers arriving in Canada, vaccinated or not, from countries outside of the U.S. must be tested for COVID-19 upon arrival. The federal government has closed its border to foreign nationals who have recently traveled through 10 African nations, including Nigeria. There are some big changes coming to photo radar in Alberta, changes that will impact those who have a little bit of a lead foot. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us shortly. It appears as though Alberta may be in better financial shape than we first realized. Finance Minister Travis Taves said the deficit will be around $5.8 billion, which is around $4 billion lower than the 2021 budget predicted. To talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, what are the main reasons why the deficit may be a little lower than we anticipated for our province?
The simple answer basically is that energy revenues are up, energy royalties paid from the oil and gas sector. Our government is extremely dependent on royalties from energy resources in order to do its budget every year. That's why the provincial sales tax thing comes up every year or two. And so, back in February when they made the last budget and in the updates since, there'd been some real dire predictions about what the state of the province's finances were going to be. But there has been a little bit of a turnaround in the economy in the last few months. And that means that money is flowing back into government coffers. So they're looking at a deficit that's about $4 billion lower, and then deficits for the next couple of years, but again, lower deficits than had initially been predicted. So, a little bit of good economic news, and also something that's going to make the budgeting process a heck of a lot easier for Jason Kenney's government going into the next year.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's chat a little more about the economy here. Predictions by RBC and ATB suggest that Alberta will have the highest rate of growth in the country in 2022. Home sales in Calgary apparently have hit record levels, and tech investment is up. Is it safe to say that maybe we're turning the corner here in our province?
Well, predictions like that, I think, you risk making a fool of yourself, but certainly it's promising news. The metrics are looking good. Unemployment is back up to or down, I suppose, to where we were at pre-pandemic levels. So we're not at boom time levels yet, but we're back to, the normal we've had for the last 5 years or so. There have been big tech investments with Amazon, for example, and those are maybe a sign of some of this diversification stuff that politicians and analysts have been talking about for years. And this growth, about 6% growth, I think, is what those reports had predicted. Now, the thing to keep in mind, of course, is that Alberta's economy contracted more than any other economy in the country, with the exception of the Northwest Territories. So we have a bigger hole to climb out of. But the sort of casting forward, things are looking quite good for the economy, which of course it's good news for everyday Albertans who are looking to find jobs and for their kids to find jobs and things like that. But it's also it's sort of politically important because Jason Kenney obviously has had some troubles as leader of the United Conservative Party and as leader of the government. There's an election in a year and a half, so on the political side of things, an economy turning around is a very good sign for Jason Kenney's Conservatives over the next year and a half.
Now let's talk a little bit about that discontent within the UCP caucus. It didn't appear to be as bad as many were thinking during the recent UCP convention in Calgary. How much of the unrest, which has been reported by the mainstream media, do you feel damaged the party? I mean, since the next provincial election, as you say, about a year and a half from now. Does the party have time to turn things around and maybe improve its image?
Yeah, I think they probably do. The question at this point is still sort of whether or not they are going to try and improve their image with Jason Kenney at the helm, or whether or not they're going to, send him overboard and find someone new to sort of help rebuild the party's brand. talking to Jason Kenney's people, they feel quite strongly that the economy is going to be huge in his bid to stay on as leader of the party and to win the next election. The thing is, there is this discontent within the party. Like, there's no doubt about that. It's just the sort of question is, how organized are they, and are they going to be able to force Jason Kenney out? I mean, there was this effort at the UCP AGM to put anti-Kenney people onto the board of directors who would have been able to force an earlier leadership review, would have been able to perhaps set how this leadership review was going to happen. They would have had quite a bit of power to determine not necessarily Jason Kenney's fate, but how his fate was determined. And that effort failed. Basically, a number of Kenney loyalists are on the board again. And so he still has like quite a strong grip on the higher levels of the party. So there is this discontent. The question, I think, is whether or not he survives this leadership review in April, and sort of more to the point, whether or not Conservative voters in the province look at Jason Kenney and say, well, we might be mad about everything he's done, but we're probably going to be more mad if Rachel Notley wins the next election. So, at some point that might sort of force everybody to fall into line, would be my sort of speculation and prediction on that front, I think.
Tyler, the NDP made a big pre-election promise to spend about $520 million on rural broadband internet if they're elected in 2023. Now, this would be public money, but NDP leader Rachel Notley says the funds would be recouped within, 6 years and create quite a number of jobs.
Yeah, so, of course, the United Conservatives jumped on this immediately and said, you guys were in government for, 4 years, 5 years. Why didn't you do anything about it then? But I think this is a pretty clear sign that we are entering sort of that pre-election phase, the last year and a half of a government, when people start making promises, start, acting like the government in waiting. This is an interesting one. So Notley made this pitch in front of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta convention, basically saying that this is an issue. This is a crucial, essential service, for the economy. You can't have, tech businesses or, software development or whatever in, an area that doesn't have high-speed internet. So basically, she's suggesting they leverage sort of the spending power of the Alberta government, do a bidding process to find a company to provide it, and then go ahead with it. Now, the notable thing here, too, is the United Conservatives have made a similar promise. They made it back in July to bring higher speed internet to rural communities and Indigenous communities. And they promised about $150 million. And it seems it's a little bit unclear exactly what they're doing, because they're still sort of exploring options, as far as I can tell. But it seems like some sort of a public-private partnership, maybe seeking some money from other levels of government and stuff like that to try and get this done. But it's interesting because living in the city, I think we probably totally take for granted that our internet is fast and on demand whenever we need it. But there are obviously parts of the province where that's not the case. So interesting in that regard as an essential service. This goes back to the economy stuff we just talked about, but also some of this pre-election sort of jostling that I think we're going to see more and more of.
Tyler, let's talk a bit now about photo radar. Many Albertans feel it's not much of a deterrent to get people to slow down, just more of a cash cow for municipalities. Now, you have some big news regarding photo radar.
That's right. So Wednesday morning, the party, the United Conservative Government, announced changes to the photo radar policy. There'd been a moratorium on sort of new photo radar since, I think, 2019, and that moratorium has been extended to December 2022, I believe. And so there's going to be some more consultation, some more discussion, but the gist of the new rules that are coming into effect in April look something like this. There will be rules against issuing 2 photo radar tickets within about a 5-minute time period, for example. There will be restrictions on placing photo radar within sort of basically residential areas, roads where the speed limit is less than 50 kilometers an hour, with exceptions for schools, playgrounds, and construction zones. The vehicles will have to be brightly and publicly marked. I'm not sure what it's like in other parts of the province, but in Edmonton, for example, they're like fluorescent yellow trucks on the side of the road. And the other thing is that municipalities and police will have to sort of use data to justify why they're placing photo radar vehicles in these specific areas. So, a lot of sort of logistical work to be done still, but no doubt, good news to the people that do feel this is a cash cow. And it brought in, over $200 million, I think, last year. So a pretty significant chunk of change sort of bouncing around from photo radar. But, this is a pretty key promise for the United Conservatives, I think, and sort of a good red meat issue, I think, that their supporters are going to feel strongly about.
Yeah, I have to admit that I've contributed a few dollars to the coffers here in Lethbridge as well when it came to photo radar. Now, Tyler, we have our first case of the Omicron COVID-19 variant, a person in quarantine who returned to Alberta from Nigeria. The province announced the return of contact tracing, PCR testing for close contacts. How many people are being monitored?
Yeah, so it's about 156, I think, a little over 150 people who've been come back from that part of the world, from Africa mainly, who are being sort of monitored and tested and things like that. So Dr. Dina Hinshaw basically coming out and saying, not the time to panic, time to take this seriously. And so bringing back some of these testing things to sort of get a sense of where the virus might be spreading within communities. Notable in that there wasn't sort of an immediate, new lockdown or something. Not that any province has done that, but there hasn't been sort of an overwhelming response to this, I wouldn't say. And it's also worth noting that a lot of the public health measures that were put in place back in September are still actually in place. So, in terms of like levers that they can pull to do something, there aren't a whole ton of them left unless they're going to go back to something really strict. So anyways, it's something I'll certainly be watching, because other governments, the federal government has responded with border closures and new testing requirements in airports. Other provinces monitoring people and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how this spreads within Alberta and whether or not that spread can be arrested in the coming weeks.
Alberta Health Services has apparently backed off a little on mandating vaccines for healthcare workers. We've interviewed a number of nurses here in the province who've said that, they're going to have to leave their occupation entirely because they don't like being forced to have to get the COVID-19 jab. Now, the deadline was November 30th for a lot of these healthcare professionals, and a number of the unvaccinated staff were put on unpaid leave, such as the nurses who we interviewed. Where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so it's sort of a strange setup that they've got here. Basically, they looked at some of the sites in the province and said, there's simply not enough people working at some of these sites that we can, fully enforce this policy. So I believe it's about 250 healthcare workers are affected by this at 16 sites or something like that around the province. Now, what that's going to mean for them is they can do testing. They'll have to pay for it within 48 hours of their shift, I believe, and then they can work. The issue sort of being that, if these people had been put on unpaid leave, there simply wouldn't have been enough people to deliver healthcare in those parts of the province. But obviously, in the major centers, the people who have not been vaccinated will be put on unpaid leave. And I believe the deadline for some of these things has been pushed back to December 13th. So, they've backed off a little bit in some of these areas where there would be a bit of a crisis in the healthcare system, but not fully. We saw in Quebec, for example, they fully backed off of this promise, and Ontario never really went down that road. So it's just notable because, British Columbia, I think, is the only sort of big province that has sort of successfully gone ahead with this and stuck to its guns on it throughout the process. So, good news for some of the unvaccinated workers in some of these areas, and also important news probably for the people who need healthcare, who, will be able to get it.
Tyler, the $10 a day childcare deal was announced recently, but the province's parents may actually begin applying for the subsidy in January.
That's right. So this was, a huge announcement a couple weeks ago. Big election promise from the Trudeau Liberals. Alberta was seen as sort of a bit of a holdout on getting this money. And now some details sort of coming out on when these sort of things are going to be rolling out. And that's right. Applications in January. And it's kind of a complicated process in terms of subsidies to the daycare provider, subsidies to the parents, things like that. And Alberta's program, I want to mention this because I think it's really important to how Alberta's program works, is that it is sort of means tested. There, up to $180,000 family income, you get sort of money for this, and it's a graded scale. So you get cheaper daycare if your income's less than $120,000, and then it's a little bit more expensive up to $180,000, which is, I think, at this point unique in how other provinces are doing this. So it's just worth noticing that, and also that the actual process for seeing how this is going to work is beginning to start. And the other thing I should mention is also in the spring of 2022, the government says that's when it's going to start creating these new spaces, because of course that's one of sort of the attendant issues here. It's not just cost, it's also the number of available spaces for parents to put their kids in.
The province is considering changing the name of a Calgary constituency to honor the memory of a PC MLA who was tragically killed in 2015 when he stopped on the side of Highway 2 to help a stranded motorist. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it was Manmeet Bhullar, who is, a quite well-liked, well-known progressive conservative MLA from Calgary. And he was sort of driving home late at night, if I recall correctly, back in 2015, and pulled over to help someone who had a car broken down or flat tire. and got hit and was killed. And he was 35, I think, and was a very sort of sad moment in Alberta politics. And so the proposal has been made to rename Calgary McCall, I think, is Calgary Buller McCall, rename the riding, and which I can't imagine there's going to be huge opposition to something like this. But it is a little bit notable because if we recall during the federal election campaign, the New Democrats had proposed changing Toronto Centre to Toronto Layton or something like that after Jack Layton, and there was quite a large controversy about sort of partisan naming of electoral ridings. But the thing is, it's actually quite common in Alberta. You've got riding named after Lockheed, Manning, things like that. So just sort of the context of this happening is just a little bit interesting, I would say.
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for your time today.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
Sharing the gospel is something most Christians believe they should do, but how many actually do that is perhaps another question. It can be intimidating. Some say one way to learn to do this is to go on short-term missions trips. Well, today's guest is going to discuss this with us. Melissa Hyland is the founder of Beautiful Feet International. It's a mission organization that has more than 50 pregnancy centers around the world. She's also the author of Get Set, a spiritual preparation for short-term missions. And she is joining us from Daytona, Florida. Welcome to Bridge City News, Melissa. So great to have you on today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So first of all, Melissa, maybe tell us a little bit about your book. What's it all about?
It is a devotional for short-term mission teams. It's a 31-day devotional, and it's designed to do one devotional a day for the month before you go to prepare yourself spiritually for the work that you're going to be doing on the field.
Okay, well, that makes sense, and it sounds like a handy tool for sure. So how long have you been doing mission work yourself?
I started doing international mission work in 1997, so that makes 24 years.
And I understand you at times do multiple trips a year.
Yes, I do have the privilege of doing that.
Yeah, and I think this year alone you've already been on 4, right? So that is very privileged.
Yes, it's been wonderful.
Yeah. Now, Melissa, there are quite a number of studies that indicate that a lot of Christians don't share their faith with others. So why do you think people are so reluctant?
I think that people don't share their faith because they're afraid to share their faith. And I think that that's very normal. In fact, even in the Bible, the Apostle Paul talks about sharing with fear and trembling, and which is a comfort to me because I think, I don't think of Paul as a fearful person. So if he was trembling, then I think it's okay that we are too. And so I really think that it's a lack of training. People are afraid. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. And so I really recommend that people take some kind of a class, a training on sharing your faith. It doesn't have to be some big, long college class. It can just be, a 1 or 2 hour seminar. But I think that when people get some training in it, that gives them confidence to do what it is that they want to do.
Right. And then your book also is about getting people prepared for I guess, sharing for faith and for missions trips, which essentially is what a missions trip is, right? So maybe can you share a few key things that a person would need to do to get properly prepared to do this?
When we're going to take go on a mission trip, the enemy doesn't like that, right? He wants to stop that. And so he's going to do all these things to try to discourage us. And he's not creative. He kind of comes in the same way all the time to discourage us. And so this is something that I wrote after years of experience with the kinds of things that I saw that were discouraging people and making it hard for them to go. So I kind of look at God's word and passages in God's word that just address these different kinds of things that maybe are troubling to encourage and give us the strength to go and do the work that God's called us to do.
Sounds like a lot of wisdom in there. Now, Melissa, you believe that short-term mission trips are vital, right? So why do you say that?
I say that because, well, for one thing, because I've been doing it a long time. And so I actually, a number of years ago, did kind of my own research, if you can call it that, and sent letters to pastors and missionaries on the ground around the world to kind of ask them how they felt about short-term teams and, whether they were valuable or, important or not. And I got resounding yes from them. Please come, because there are a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is because it can be very hard on the mission field. And when you have a team come, it's so encouraging. It gives you energy and is just something that, it gives you more strength to go on and do what it is that God's called you to do. Also, a lot of times teams can come in and do something that the people on the ground can't do just because of the numbers. If they're just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, they can't always accomplish the things that a team that comes in with 10 or 15 or 20 people can do. So they're very specific jobs that can be done. And also, they are very valuable for the people themselves who go, because most people, almost all people that I know, will say that when they took their first short-term mission trip, that it was a life-changing event for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I did one myself years ago to Dominican Republic, and I would describe it that way as well. Now, Melissa, would you recommend those who are scared to share their faith go on a trip anyway?
I would, but I also would recommend that even before you go, that you get some training and that you practice here in the United States, because the point is that God wants us to share our faith wherever we are, right? Not just when we go to the Dominican Republic or wherever we go, but in our life, He wants us to do that. And so I really recommend that you are practicing it where you are and then taking it with you wherever you go.
Yeah, whether that's the U.S., Canada, wherever you live, right in your own back alley, right?
That's right.
Okay, now you describe short-term missions trips as thrilling, stretching, and scary. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that whenever we do something that we're not used to doing, for me and for other people, it's kind of scary. We like to do what we know. And so it can definitely be stretching for all kinds of reasons, because a lot of times you're going somewhere where you don't speak the language. A lot of times you're going with a group of people that you don't know very well, and all of a sudden you're with them 24/7. Typically, when you're on a mission trip, you don't have a room to yourself. So, you're in a room with other people that you may not know very well. You're eating foods that you don't know. I mean, everything is new. And so that can be intimidating, scary, but it's also thrilling just to be able to be on mission from God, to just see God work. And, all of those things that make it difficult are also the things that kind of put a spotlight on the Lord and allow Him to really show His glory.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of which, have you ever seen any miracles happen on any of these trips?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen lots of miracles. I can share one from my most recent trip. I was in Togo, West Africa in September, and we have 14 pregnancy centers there. And while we were there, we got a call from one of the clinics where we have a pregnancy center, letting us know that one of our clients came in to deliver her babies. She was actually pregnant with twins. And so we went to the pregnancy center, to the clinic, and we were able to pray with the mom and pray for the children. And while we were there, they told us that there was a little 3-year-old boy who was also at the clinic. He was unconscious, he was unresponsive, and they didn't have what they needed. They didn't even really know what was wrong with him. And so we asked if we could go in and pray for him as well. So we did. We went into his room and we laid hands on the little boy and we prayed for him, prayed for his mom. He was completely unresponsive while we were there. However, the next morning, we got a call from some people that worked there at the clinic. They actually came to the home where we were staying to share with us that he was fine, that God had healed this little boy. And they even brought a picture of him. And he was just standing up and laughing and looking so joyful, like any other little boy, a completely different person than the one we had seen the night before.
That's interesting. What had been wrong with him? That's kind of scary.
they did not know. That was the thing. They didn't know what was wrong with him. And I don't know what was wrong with him, but I know that the Lord healed him.
Oh, that's amazing. So, Melissa, what do you say to those who say that they either can't afford a trip or that they can't get time off of work or any other reasons like that? I mean, that's very common. So sometimes people think a place might be too dangerous as well. So what do you say to that?
So it depends on the situation, but if you really, I would say to someone, if you're in that situation and you really want to go and you really feel that God is calling you to go, then I would say that you need to pray, because I have seen many times God open doors for people that they didn't think would be opened. And in terms of finances, very rarely does anyone come and say, oh, I want to go on the trip and here, I can write you a check. You know, typically people do not have the money, but sometimes those things are true and you really can't go. Sometimes there are circumstances where you can't go, but you can still be a part of that because you can still pray and you can still give. And so the people who are stay behind and are praying, the people who are giving and praying for others to go are absolutely a vital part of the mission, as vital as the people who actually get their feet on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, we're talking about all the positive things about this, but you also say that sometimes on these short-term trips, team members can sometimes compete with one another, and that's a little discouraging. So what does that typically look like?
I have not seen a whole lot of it, but sometimes I think that people can be discouraged because, they have taken vacation, they've spent all their money, and they get over there and maybe they're not getting to shine in the way that they thought they would be able to because they don't speak the language, or maybe because they're not particularly skilled in the thing that's needed right that minute. But again, I think it all goes back to the concept of the body of Christ, right? And God chooses the team. And I believe that every time someone goes, that you are so important. God chose you to be a part of that team. So maybe you're not the one standing up and speaking, or maybe you're not the one standing up and singing, but you are there. You are praying, you are a part of the team, and every part of the team is equally important, just the way the Bible talks about the body of Christ, right? And just in general, we're not all designed to do the exact same thing. And sometimes some parts of the body maybe look more glamorous than others, but in terms of the function of the whole and God's design, every piece is equally important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would think that he would equip you for what he wants you to do, right? So, I mean, what advice do you have for viewers who are considering this?
Well, I would encourage you to go. If there's any way you can go, again, like we were saying before, it really is a life-changing experience. So if you can go, I encourage you to go. I encourage you to pray. Be praying for opportunities, and God will show you. You will be surprised at the opportunities that God brings to you once you start praying. And so just commit yourself to praying, and maybe even ask some other people to pray with you for God to show you what it is that He has for you.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of feedback do you generally get from those who go on these short-term missions trips? I know we were saying before that most people say it's life-changing in one way or another, but what other kinds of feedback do you get?
Just they love it, because typically when you're on a mission trip, you're just completely focused on God and what He's doing. And so you're going to see over and over again God showing up in ways that you don't notice sometimes in your regular life, because in our regular life, a lot of times we're doing the things that we know how to do, and we're kind of not relying on God as much, right? We're relying on our own strength. Well, I know how to do this. This is my job. This is what I do. But all of a sudden, when you get into a place where you don't know what you're doing, you really are focused on God, kind of like Peter walking on the water, right? When he was in the boat, well, he kind of knew what he was doing. But once he got out of that boat, he really had to keep his eyes on Jesus, and then he could walk on water. And so, I think that, and also another part of it too, is it opens people's eyes to how other people in the world are living. You know, when you go somewhere and you see people living, you know, without electricity, you see people living without access to clean water. I mean, you see really the world as most people live it. I think then you come to be more grateful for what you have and more compassionate with more of a desire to help others because you realize how great the need really is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Melissa. I know one thing that was very impactful for me was seeing how these people live, but they're not feeling sorry for themselves at all. In fact, they were offering us gifts just for being there and coming to their homes, and some of them were literally living in garbage dumps and stuff. So a humbling experience, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being with us, Melissa. We really appreciate having you on today. Melissa Hyland is the author of Get Set, a spiritual preparation for short-term missions. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.